I returned to my driveway through a torrential Chicago downpour just to retrieve a forgotten tax file. Instead, I found my husband in the back seat of his Lincoln Navigator entangled with our real estate agent. When the door opened, I saw a dark, soaking patch on the pristine cream leather where she had been sitting, and I knew instantly it was not rain. At that moment, my marriage ceased to be a partnership and became a fraudulent account requiring immediate liquidation. My name is Alara Vance. At 34 years of age, I have built a reputation as a forensic auditor who views the world through a lens of binary logic. In my profession, numbers are the only things that possess integrity. People are merely variables that tend to introduce error. I was driving back to my home in the quiet suburb of Oak Park, battling a storm that felt biblical in its intensity. The wipers of my car were fighting a losing battle against the sheets of gray water, but I had no choice. I had left a critical binder of tax documents regarding the Stratus audit merger on my dining room table, and without them, tomorrow morning's briefing would be a disaster. As I turned onto our street, the first thing I noticed was the disruption in the pattern. Our driveway was usually empty at this hour, yet there sat the massive black Lincoln Navigator belonging to my husband, Derek. As the chief financial officer at North Tech Dynamics, Derek was a man of precise habits. He never parked in the driveway. He always pulled into the garage to protect the paintwork. Yet there it was, parked haphazardly at an aggressive angle near the garage entrance, as if abandoned in a moment of desperate urgency. I killed the engine of my car down the street to avoid the headlights sweeping across the house and sprinted toward the driveway, shielding my head with my briefcase. I intended to rush past the vehicle and into the house, but I froze before I could reach the front steps. The heavy SUV was rocking. It was a subtle, rhythmic motion that seemed out of sync with the wind buffeting the trees. The windows were heavily steamed, obscured by condensation, but the interior dome light flickered on for a split second, perhaps bumped by a wayward limb. It was enough. I saw two silhouettes in the back seat, entangled in a chaotic knot of limbs and fabric. I did not need to speculate about the identity of the woman. Even through the rain-streaked glass and the fog, that cascading mane of auburn hair was unmistakable. It was Serafina, the flashy real estate agent who had been handling the sale of our investment condo for the past 3 months. She had a laugh that was too loud and a habit of touching Derek's arm whenever she mentioned escrow periods. I stood paralyzed in the rain, water soaking through my trench coat, as the rear door on the passenger side suddenly swung open. Derek stepped out. He was fumbling with his belt buckle, his shirt untucked and wrinkled. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling a breath that I could see misting in the cold air, but my eyes were not fixed on him. They were locked on the interior of the car behind him. The cream leather upholstery, usually immaculate, bore a jagged, dark stain where Serafina had just been sliding. It was a wet, glistening patch that reflected the dim street lamp overhead. It was not rain. The raw, biological reality of that wet mark on the seat hit me harder than the act of sex itself. It was a stain of disrespect, a crude territory marker left on the life we had built. I did not scream. I did not charge forward to demand an explanation. The emotional part of my brain attempted to flare up, but my professional training seized control immediately. I stepped backward into the deep shadows of the oversized oak tree that lined our walkway. With steady hands, I retrieved my phone and switched the camera to burst mode. I zoomed in. I captured the license plate. I captured Serafina stepping out of the car, smoothing down her skirt, her face flush with adrenaline. I captured Derek leaning in to kiss her, a sloppy, lingering goodbye that made my stomach turn. And, with a grim focus, I zoomed in as far as the lens would allow to capture that dark, wet smear on the leather seat before Derek slammed the door shut. Serafina ran to her red sports car parked down the block, and Derek stood there for a moment, watching her go. He whistled a low tune, adjusted his collar one last time, and walked into our house with the swagger of a man who believed he had just closed the deal of a lifetime. I waited until the front door clicked shut. Then, I turned and walked 2 blocks back to where I had left my car. I sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the cabin amplifying the sound of the rain hammering the roof. For 10 minutes, I just breathed. The shock began to fade, replaced by a sensation that was cold, sharp, and familiar. It was the feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a ledger that everyone else had missed. I did not cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and tethered it to my phone. I navigated to the cloud drive Derek and I shared, a digital space he assumed I never accessed because he often complained I was too married to my work. I drove to a 24-hour coffee shop on the edge of town, a place with fluorescent lights and stale air. I ordered a double shot of espresso, black. I opened a new directory on my screen. I typed 2 words for the folder name, The Purge. I stared at the blinking cursor, promising myself that for every drop of cold rain that had soaked into my skin tonight, Derek would pay with a pound of his social and financial standing. The fluorescent hum of the coffee shop sign was the only company I had as I dissected the last 6 months of my life. I treated my marriage like a chaotic spreadsheet that refused to balance. I looked back at the weekends Derek had claimed were for urgent business trips to Denver and Seattle. I recalled the vague expenses listed under client entertainment and the cloying floral scent of a perfume that lingered on his blazer 2 months ago. He had laughed it off, blaming an overzealous marketing director who hugged everyone. I had accepted it because, in my world, people did not lie about things that were so easily verifiable. I was wrong. I logged into the subsidiary credit card account Derek had opened for what he called household incidentals. He assumed I never looked at it because the autopay was linked to his personal bonus account. I filtered the search by merchant categories. There it was, glaringly obvious in the data. Recurring payments to the Ritz-Carlton every Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. That was his scheduled gym time. He was not lifting weights. He was lifting the sheets in a suite that cost $400 an hour. My fingers flew across the keyboard, opening a new tab for Instagram. I navigated to Serafina's public profile. I scrolled back to last week. There was a photo of a lobster dinner at the Capitol Grill, tagged with the caption celebrating a closed deal. The timestamp matched perfectly with the night Derek told me he was stuck in a board meeting that ran late. The background of her photo showed a blurry man's hand wearing a watch that looked identical to the Patek Philippe I had bought Derek for our 5th anniversary. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me. It was a text from Sloan, my best friend and one of the city's most ruthless crisis management experts. The message was uncharacteristically short. "I need drinks immediately." It read, "It is an emergency." Sloan never panicked. She was the woman corporations called when their CEOs were caught embezzling. If she was spiraling, the world was ending. I drove to her penthouse in the city center. The door was unlocked. When I walked in, the sound of shattering porcelain echoed from the living room. Sloan was standing by the fireplace, heaving a heavy ceramic vase against the marble hearth. She was sobbing, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. Julian, her husband and a partner at Lexus & Company, was not there. "Julian is sleeping with his 22-year-old secretary." Sloan screamed, her voice cracking. I poured her a glass of whiskey and forced her to sit down. We began to compare notes, our voices low and trembling with rage. I told her about the wet seat in the Navigator. She told me about the late nights Julian spent at the office. We laid our calendars side by side on the coffee table. The realization hit us like a physical blow. Derek and Julian were both members of the exclusive Ironwood Golf Club. Their absences aligned perfectly. Every Tuesday afternoon. Every phantom business trip. Sloan wiped her face and reached into her purse. She pulled out a cheap, burner smartphone. She told me she found it hidden in the side pocket of Julian's golf bag when she was looking for a bottle opener. She had guessed the passcode was EY0 because Julian was too arrogant to think she would ever look. She opened the photo gallery and showed me screenshots she had taken of a group chat app called Signal. The group was named the Gentleman's Ledger. It was not just Derek and Julian. There were 2 others. I recognized the names immediately from the charity gala circuit. Marcus, the city's premier plastic surgeon, and Elias, a venture capitalist with a reputation for being a family man. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. This was not just a case of straying husbands. It was an organized syndicate. They were covering for each other. When Derek said he was with Julian, Julian would corroborate the lie because he was actually with his secretary. They were creating alibis, sharing locations of safe houses, and treating their infidelities like a coordinated project. Sloane looked at me, her eyes hardening as the shock turned into the same cold fury I felt. We knew what we had to do. We could not just confront them. They would deny, gaslight, and destroy the evidence. We needed a bigger army. I told Sloane to pick up her phone. We were going to call Piper, Marcus's wife, and Mercy, the wife of Elias. If the men had a ledger, we were about to conduct an audit that would leave them bankrupt in every sense of the word. Piper looked like a librarian who had wandered into the wrong genre of movie. She wore oversized spectacles and oversized cardigans, but underneath that unassuming exterior was a mind that terrified foreign governments. She was a cybersecurity engineer for a federal agency, and her office, which she jokingly called the safe house, was a soundproofed fortress in the basement of a nondescript building downtown. We met there at midnight. The air in the room was heavy, smelling faintly of ozone and the expensive perfume Mercy wore, which now seemed to carry the metallic scent of impending war. Mercy sat rigidly on a folding chair. As the city's most sought-after event planner, she controlled the social calendar of the elite. If a gala happened in Chicago, Mercy knew who attended, who sat next to whom, and who left early. She was meticulous, a woman who noticed if a napkin was folded 3 degrees off-center. Tonight, her composure was cracking. Piper did not waste time with pleasantries. She connected the cloned phone Sloane had seized to her terminal. Her fingers moved across her mechanical keyboard with a speed that blurred in the low light. She bypassed the biometric locks and brute-forced the encryption on the cloud backup of the chat group. The husbands, in their arrogance, had relied on standard consumer-grade security, assuming their wives were too technically illiterate to look past the passcode. They were wrong. When the contents of the gentleman's ledger appeared on the 3 large monitors on the wall, the room went silent. A wave of nausea hit me. It was worse than just infidelity. It was a locker room brought to life with digital permanence. There were explicit photographs, crude ratings of their mistresses' performances, and, most unforgivably, mocking commentary about us. They ridiculed our intelligence, our bodies, and our dedication to the families they were dismantling. I scanned the logs and realized with a sinking heart that Derek was not just a participant. He was the ringleader. He was using his expertise as a CFO to structure their affairs like a tax evasion scheme. He had pinned instructions to the top of the chat, detailing how to use corporate expense accounts to rent secret apartments without triggering audits. Mercy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She pointed to a thread involving Elias. He had shared the address of a penthouse in the Marina District, boasting about the privacy. "I am designing the interior for that unit," Mercy whispered, her voice shaking. "For an anonymous client. I spent weeks picking out silk drapes for a woman Elias is paying to sleep with him." Sloane was next. She found a transaction Julian had labeled as a corporate gift. It was a transfer of $80,000. She cross-referenced it with a bank alert she had ignored last month. Julian had drained a significant portion of their joint retirement savings to buy a luxury sedan for his secretary. He had stolen their future to pay for his present amusement. Then it was my turn. I dug deeper into Derek's files, applying my forensic auditing skills to the raw data Piper unearthed. I found a series of transfers from North Tech Dynamics totaling nearly $500,000. They were funneled into a shell company controlled by Serafina for a real estate development project that did not exist. Derek had not just cheated on me. He had committed grand larceny and wire fraud. He had risked his entire existence for a woman who left wet stains on my car seat. We sat back, the glow of the monitors illuminating our pale faces. The sorrow was gone, incinerated by the heat of the evidence before us. We did not need to discuss the next step. The conclusion was unanimous. Divorce was too simple. It was too clean. We possessed a unique set of skills: a forensic auditor, a crisis manager, a cybersecurity expert, and a social strategist. We would not just leave them, we would dismantle them. We would use the very careers they neglected us for to burn their lives to the ground, piece by piece. I walked back into my house, shaking the rain from my umbrella, and immediately stepped onto a stage. I assumed the role of the supportive, slightly distracted wife, a character I had played for years without realizing the audience was laughing at me. I found Derek in the living room, pouring himself a scotch. "How was the board meeting?" I asked, watching him with the detached scrutiny of a scientist observing a lab rat. He looked me dead in the eye. "It was intense. We debated fourth quarter projections for hours." He lied with such fluidity that it was almost impressive, a practiced reflex devoid of any moral friction. Then, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he handed me a small orange box. It was an Hermes silk scarf, printed with an intricate equestrian pattern. "I saw it in the window and thought of you," he said. I held the smooth, cool silk in my hands, fighting the urge to strangle him with it. Thanks to the invoice Piper had pulled from his email archives an hour ago, I knew exactly what this was. It was a promotional gift with purchase. He had bought Serafina a $5,000 handbag, and the store had thrown in the scarf for free. I was receiving the leftovers of his infidelity, wrapped in luxury packaging. Across the city, my coalition was performing the same grim theater. We played house while plotting treason. While Julian showered, Sloane was downstairs mirroring his hard drive. While Elias watched football, Mercy was photographing the deeds to the properties he claimed were business assets. We were efficient, silent, and deadly. The men, emboldened by their own perceived cleverness, announced their plans for a leadership retreat at the end of the month. They claimed it was a weekend of intensive strategy workshops at a remote lake house. We knew from the group chat that the only strategy involved was how to transport 3 kegs of beer and a group of exotic dancers without leaving a paper trail. This was the opening we needed. Mercy, leveraging her reputation as the city's premier event planner, suggested a send-off dinner. She pitched it as a private celebration of the Ironwood Brotherhood, a toast to their success before their big trip. She proposed holding it at the Vault, a newly renovated underground wine cellar that was strictly invitation only. The husbands agreed immediately. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness. They interpreted our gesture not as a trap, but as tribute. They believed we were vying for their attention, perhaps hoping to secure a larger allowance or a vacation approval. They saw us as accessories to their lives, incapable of complex plotting. They had no idea they were agreeing to their own execution. That night, while Derek slept the heavy sleep of the guilty, I sat in his home office and found the final piece of the puzzle. I discovered a series of pending transfers. Derek was slowly moving our joint liquid assets into an account under his mother's name. I cross-referenced this with a message he had sent to the group, bragging that he planned to serve me with divorce papers next year, once he had sufficiently drained our accounts. He intended to leave me with nothing but the house and its mortgage. The anger that had been simmering in my gut solidified into cold, hard motivation. I stopped feeling like a victim and started working like an auditor. I began compiling the marriage audit. I documented every steak dinner, every hotel suite, every piece of jewelry, and every flight booked for Serafina. I traced the funds back to his embezzlement from North Tech Dynamics. I was not just building a divorce case, I was building a prison sentence. Meanwhile, Sloane was drafting press releases and anonymous tips that would dismantle Julian's reputation as a family values lawyer. Piper completed her masterpiece by installing military-grade spyware on all 4 of their phones. Their devices were now open microphones, broadcasting their every word to our servers 24 hours a day. We could hear them laughing about us. We could hear them planning their future without us. They were walking blindly toward the edge of a cliff, and we were the ones greasing the slope. The countdown to the dinner at the Vault had reached the 72-hour mark. While my nerves should have been fraying, I felt a surge of adrenaline that sharpened my focus. I had the digital trail, but I needed the physical key to lock the cell door behind Derek. I needed the black ledger he kept in his home office, a book he claimed contained proprietary Northtech formulas, but which I suspected held the access codes to his offshore accounts. I waited until 2 in the morning. The sound of Derek's heavy, alcohol-induced snoring vibrated through the master bedroom walls. I slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. I picked the lock of his desk drawer with a tension wrench I had borrowed from Piper. It took me less than 30 seconds. Inside, beneath a stack of innocuous invoices, lay the leather-bound notebook. I photographed every page. It was a roadmap of greed, listing account numbers in the Cayman Islands and routing instructions that bypassed every compliance protocol known to the banking industry. While I was securing the evidence, Mercy was transforming the venue. She sent us photos of the vault. To the untrained eye, it looked like a romantic, candlelit dungeon designed for an intimate celebration of friends. There were red roses and vintage crystal glasses. However, to us, the layout was deliberate. The long table was positioned so that the 4 men would be seated with their backs to the wall, facing the projector screen, with no easy path to the single, heavy steel door. Mercy had designed a courtroom disguised as a banquet. Piper was busy finalizing the ammunition. She had created a PowerPoint presentation titled, "A Decade of Friendship." It looked innocent enough on the desktop, the kind of file that would contain photos of golf trips and backyard barbecues. In reality, it was a digital indictment, a carefully curated sequence of their sins ready to be projected in high definition. The tension nearly snapped the next afternoon. I was in the kitchen, scanning Derek's passport to include in the dossier. When the doorbell rang, it was Serafina. She was holding a thick envelope of real estate documents, her face plastered with a professional smile that faltered when she saw me in my bathrobe. She had come to drop off papers for the condo sale, clearly expecting Derek to be home. I had the passport sitting right on the counter. With a smooth, unhurried motion, I slid a cutting board over it. I did not panic. Instead, I invited her in. I offered her tea. I watched her squirm in her designer heels, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for Derek. I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee, and smiled at her. "Derek is busy," I told her calmly. "I will take the papers." Then, as she turned to leave, I dropped my voice to a whisper. "I hope you managed to clean the back seat of the Navigator. That wet stain looked incredibly difficult to remove from cream leather." The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She stammered an unintelligible excuse and practically ran to her car. While I handled the mistress, Sloane was dismantling the professional safety nets. She scheduled a casual lunch with the human resources director of Julian's law firm. She did not hand over the evidence yet. That would be too direct. Instead, she played the concerned friend, dropping subtle hints about rumors circulating regarding senior partners exploiting junior staff and the potential liability it posed to the firm's reputation. She planted the seed of doubt that would make Julian's firing inevitable once the scandal broke. We gathered one last time at Piper's office to rehearse. The mood was not one of giddy excitement, but of grim determination. We assigned our roles for the night. I would be the prosecutor, presenting the financial facts. Sloane would be the judge of public opinion, handling the moral and social fallout. Piper was our digital witness, controlling the flow of evidence. Mercy was the warden, controlling the environment and the exit. On the table sat 4 thick envelopes. They contained settlement agreements drafted by the most aggressive divorce attorney Sloane knew. The terms were non-negotiable 70% of all assets, full custody where applicable, and immediate vacate orders for the marital homes. The night before the party, I lay in bed next to Derek. The room was dark, and the rhythm of his breathing was steady and oblivious. He was sleeping the sleep of a man who thought he was a king, unaware that the guillotine blade was already falling. I did not feel love, and I did not feel hate. I felt a strange, profound peace. I closed my eyes, ready for the morning. The storm had passed, and the flood was coming. The vault lived up to its name. It was a repurposed Prohibition-era wine cellar buried 20 feet beneath the foundation of an old textile factory. The walls were rough-hewn limestone that seemed to swallow the light, and the air carried a permanent chill that no amount of heating could fully dispel. It was soundproof, windowless, and completely cut off from the cellular network above. There was only one heavy steel door in or out, and tonight, it was the barrier between our husbands and the rest of the world. We arrived first. The four of us stood in a line against the back wall, a tableau of grim elegance. We had coordinated our attire without speaking a word of it aloud. We wore floor-length gowns in shades of midnight black, the kind of dresses one might wear to a high society gala or, more fittingly, to the funeral of a wealthy spouse. Our makeup was sharp, our lips painted in deep crimson, and our expressions were carved from the same stone as the cellar walls. We looked like a tribunal of widows before the bodies were even cold. The men arrived 15 minutes later, bringing the noise of the city down with them. They descended the spiral staircase in a cloud of expensive cologne and boisterous laughter, their tuxedo jackets unbuttoned, ties slightly loose. They looked like masters of the universe, confident and utterly oblivious. They saw the candles, the vintage wines breathing in decanters, and the four of us waiting for them. They did not see the execution squad. They saw a harem catering to their egos. Mercy stepped forward to play the hostess. She guided them to the long mahogany table, seating them with their backs to the stone wall so they faced the open room. She poured a vintage Cabernet, the liquid dark and rich as blood in the candlelight. She raised her glass, her eyes glittering with a dangerous light. To truth and loyalty, she proposed. The men, drunk on their own hubris, roared in agreement and drained their glasses, missing the razor-sharp irony in her voice. We let them eat the appetizers. We let them enjoy the tartare and the conversation, listening as they bragged about their golf handicaps and their stock portfolios. They were so comfortable, so safe in the bubble of their privilege. Then, Mercy gave the signal. The ambient music cut out instantly. The track lighting dimmed until the room was plunged into near darkness, save for the flickering candles on the table. A low, mechanical hum filled the silence as a massive projector screen descended from the ceiling, blocking the view of the staircase. Derek clapped his hands together, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "Oh, this is a fantastic touch. Did you girls put together a video montage for us? That is thoughtful." Piper sat at a small table in the corner, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her laptop. She hit the enter key. The screen did not show a montage of wedding photos or vacation memories. Instead, a stark, high-resolution image appeared. It was a logo, a stylized shield with 2 crossed golf clubs and a ledger book. It was the icon of their secret group chat, the Gentleman's Ledger. The effect was immediate and violent. The laughter died in their throats. The smiles slid off their faces like melting wax. The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. They stared at the screen, then at each other, and finally, with dawning horror, at us. I stepped out of the shadows and walked to the front of the room, holding a laser pointer like a weapon. I looked at Derek, whose face had gone the color of ash. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with the flat, terrifying calm of a forensic auditor who has found the smoking gun. "Welcome," I said, "to the final financial report of your lives." Behind me, the heavy steel door groaned as the electronic locks engaged with a decisive thud. At her station, Piper activated the portable signal jammer she had built. The bars on their phones vanished instantly. There was no signal. There was no way out. The party was over, and the trial had begun. I clicked the remote control in my hand, the plastic cool against my palm. The screen behind me shifted to the first slide. It was titled, Operating expenses in bold, capitalized letters. A comparative bar graph dominated the display. On the left, towering columns of red ink represented the capital flowing into luxury jewelry stores, five-star boutique hotels, and the leases for secret apartments over the last fiscal quarter. On the right, tiny, pathetic blue bars represented the household contributions and the meager anniversary gifts they had given us. I walked them through the numbers with the dispassionate cadence of a quarterly earnings review. I pointed out that Derek had spent $12,000 on a weekend getaway for Serafina in Aspen, while he had questioned me over a $200 increase in our grocery bill during the same week. I pressed the button again. Slide 2, depreciating assets. The room filled with the sharp, high-definition images Piper had processed. There was the Lincoln Navigator, captured through the heavy rain, the license plate clearly visible, and the silhouette of two figures entwined in the back. Next to it was a time-stamped photo of Julian entering the elevator at the Ritz-Carlton with his hand resting possessively on his secretary's lower back. The images were raw, undeniable, and humiliating. Derek slammed his hands onto the mahogany table and stood up, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. "Turn that machine off immediately," he shouted, his face twisting into a mask of panic and rage. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked him straight in the eye and spoke with absolute, freezing clarity. "Sit down, or by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The spreadsheet detailing your embezzlement of company funds will be on the desk of the FBI." The threat hit him like a physical blow. Derek knew better than anyone that I did not make idle threats about data. He knew the spreadsheet existed because he knew I was the only one capable of finding it. The color drained from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. He sank back into his chair, defeated, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. Sloane stepped forward for the third slide, titled Breach of Contract. The screen filled with screenshots of text messages from their group chat. These were not just about their affairs. They showed Julian mocking his high-profile clients, calling them idiots, and revealing sensitive case details that violated attorney-client privilege. Julian tried to laugh it off, waving a dismissive hand as sweat beaded on his forehead. "It is just locker room talk," he stammered. "It is a private joke among men. It means nothing." Sloane threw a heavy, bound dossier onto the table in front of him. It landed with a loud, ominous thud. "The State Bar Association will likely have a very different interpretation of your humor," she said. Piper took the floor next. Slide 4, medical risk. The screen displayed redacted medical records. They were patient files from the private clinic where Marcus worked, documenting surgical procedures that were never billed to insurance. He had been trading breast augmentations and rhinoplasties for sexual favors, performing surgery without proper anesthesiology support to keep it off the books. It was a gross violation of medical ethics and a criminal offense that would strip him of his license. Marcus began to tremble. His hand shook so violently that his wine glass tipped over. The dark red liquid splashed onto his crisp white dress shirt, spreading across his chest like a fresh, fatal wound. Mercy delivered the final blow with slide 5, bad investments. She outlined how Elias had siphoned money from his venture capital investors to pay the rent for the model's apartment. She showed the wire transfers masquerading as consulting fees. It was credit fraud, plain and simple. The 4 men who had walked in as masters of the universe were now huddled in their chairs, terrified. They were stripped of their arrogance, their excuses, and their dignity. They were no longer husbands or captains of industry. They were liabilities, and we had just exposed every single flaw in their design. The alliance of the husbands dissolved in seconds. The room, once filled with their unified arrogance, now echoed with the frantic sounds of blame. Julian turned on Derek, his face flushed and veins bulging in his neck. "This is all your fault." "Derek," Julian screamed. "You insisted we move to that stupid encrypted app." Elias, sweat dripping down his temples, pointed a shaking finger at Marcus, accusing him of being reckless with his phone security. It was a feeding frenzy of cowards, each trying to distance himself from the sinking ship. Derek, however, attempted a different strategy. He looked at me, his eyes softening into that practiced, pleading gaze he used whenever he wanted forgiveness for a forgotten birthday. "Sweetheart," he said, lowering his voice to a soothing, intimate tone. "We can fix this. Let's go home and talk about this privately. You are clearly being influenced by your friends. This isn't like you." I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of repulsion. I did not raise my voice. "Did you use a towel to clean it up, or did you just let it dry into the leather?" I asked quietly. "How did it feel to sit on it afterward?" The detailed, visceral nature of the question stripped away his charm instantly. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The disgust in my eyes silenced him more effectively than any shout could have. Sloane then stepped in to close the trap. She informed them that the entire presentation, along with their reactions, was being recorded by hidden cameras in the stonework. The footage was streaming directly to a secure cloud server. She warned them that if anyone tried to leave, or if anyone so much as raised a hand in anger, the link to the video would be automatically emailed to every major news outlet, their employers, and the ethics boards of their respective professions. We placed the documents on the table. 4 identical settlement agreements. The terms were brutal but fair given the circumstances. We demanded 70% of all marital assets. Sloane and Piper demanded full custody of their children, with supervised visitation only. And finally, we demanded that they vacate our homes immediately. Tonight. Marcus snatched the papers up, his hands trembling with rage. He looked as if he were about to rip the contract in half. Piper did not move. She adjusted her glasses and spoke with the indifference of a machine. "If you tear that paper," she said, "I will forward your chat logs regarding the illegal surgeries to the medical board within 5 minutes. Think very carefully about whether you want to be a divorced surgeon or an inmate." Marcus froze. His hand relaxed, dropping the paper back onto the table. A heavy silence descended upon the cellar. The only sounds were the scratch of pens on paper and the ragged, panicked breathing of 4 defeated men. Elias was the first to break. He was always the weakest link. He uncapped the pen and signed his name, sobbing quietly. Julian followed, muttering curses under his breath but signing nonetheless. Marcus signed next, his signature a sharp, angry scrawl. Derek was the last. He looked at the paper, then up at me. His eyes were filled with a pure, distilled hatred, a look that promised vengeance if he ever got the chance. But he knew he had no leverage. His hand shook so badly that the pen skittered across the page, leaving a jagged, distorted signature that looked nothing like the confident autograph he used on corporate checks. He pushed the paper toward me, his defeat absolute. Mercy collected the signed divorce papers with the efficiency of a court clerk, stacking them neatly into her portfolio. She walked over to the heavy steel door and threw the bolt back, the loud metallic clank echoing against the stone walls like a gunshot. The men immediately moved to stand, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the cellar, but I held up a hand. We were not quite finished. There was an addendum to the proceedings of this evening. I told them that while they were busy reviewing their legal defeats, we had taken the liberty of sending a few care packages to their other significant others. I looked directly at Derek. I informed him that Serafina had just received a digital notification from the Real Estate Commission. Thanks to the dossier of appraisal fraud I had anonymously submitted earlier that day, her license was currently suspended pending a federal investigation. She was no longer a high-flying agent. She was a radioactive liability. Sloane leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She told Julian that his secretary had received a termination email from the law firm precisely 10 minutes ago. Sloane had forwarded the chat logs proving she had knowingly engaged in a relationship with a senior partner, a direct violation of the corporate policy Julian himself had helped write. She was escorted out of the building by security before the appetizers were even served tonight. Piper tapped a final key on her keyboard and closed her laptop. She announced that the supplemental credit cards, the ones they used to buy silence and affection, had been reported lost and canceled. The cash flow to their mistresses had been severed instantly. The realization washed over the four men. We saw it in their eyes. They had not just lost their wives and their fortunes. They had lost the prizes they had destroyed their families to keep. Without the money and the status, they were of no use to the women waiting in those secret apartments. We had stripped them of everything. I reached down beside my chair and pulled out a small, hard-shell carry-on suitcase. I slid it across the stone floor until it hit Derek's shoe. It contains 3 days of clothes and your toiletries. I told him, "Do not bother coming back to the house. The smart locks have been reset." Mercy offered a final, sweet smile. "I dismissed your private drivers an hour ago," she said. "It is a pity that the reception down here is so terrible." The four men grabbed the single suitcase and shuffled out of the heavy steel door. They looked small, huddled together against the cold draft of the hallway. We listened to their footsteps fade away, followed by the distant sound of them arguing over who had a signal to call a taxi. When the silence returned, the atmosphere in the vault shifted instantly. The tension evaporated. Mercy grabbed a fresh bottle of vintage Pinot Noir and filled our glasses to the brim. For the first time in months, the four of us looked at each other and laughed. It was not the polite, social laughter we used at cocktail parties to hide our misery. It was deep, guttural, and genuine. It was the sound of freedom. We raised our glasses in a toast to Project Purge. I took the USB drive containing the presentation, the digital record of their sins, and tossed it into the gas fireplace. We watched the plastic melt and bubble, the black smoke spiraling up the chimney. The past was ash. We were clean. The morning sun that hit my face the next day felt different. It was sharp, clear, and completely unobstructed by clouds. I woke up in the center of the king-sized bed, stretching my limbs into the empty space where a liar used to sleep. The house was quiet, but it was not the lonely silence I had feared. It was the peaceful silence of ownership. The lingering scent of strange perfume and the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of deceit had vanished, swept away by the storm and the truth. I dressed with a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. My first stop was not the grocery store or the dry cleaner, but my office. I logged onto a secure server and submitted an anonymous whistleblower complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The divorce settlement had secured my financial freedom, but this final act was for my professional integrity. I attached the black ledger photos and the spreadsheet of embezzled funds Derek had used to finance his double life. This was the one thing not covered in our non-disclosure agreement. Derek was about to trade his corner office for a defendant's table in a federal courtroom. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. Within weeks, North Tech Dynamics launched an internal investigation. Derek was fired for cause, stripping him of his severance and his stock options. The criminal investigation that followed ensured he would be too busy fighting to stay out of prison to ever bother me again. The Brotherhood of the Gentleman's Ledger disintegrated just as quickly. Faced with legal scrutiny and public humiliation, the four men turned on each other, trading secrets for leniency like desperate animals caught in a trap. My friends, however, rose from the ashes. Sloane channeled her rage into a business empire, opening a boutique crisis management firm exclusively for high-net-worth women navigating divorce. She became the guardian angel she wished she had had. Piper and Mercy combined their terrifying skill sets to launch a mobile application that utilized forensic accounting algorithms to help partners detect hidden assets and financial infidelity. They called it The Audit, and it became the most downloaded lifestyle app in the state within a month. As for the physical remnants of my past, I dealt with them efficiently. I sold the Lincoln Navigator the very next day. I could not bear to look at that cream leather seat without seeing the ghost of that rainy night. I took the proceeds from the sale, every single cent of it, and donated it to a local shelter that helped women escape abusive and coercive relationships. It felt poetic to turn the vehicle of my betrayal into a vehicle for someone else's escape. A few days later, I drove my new car, a sleek coupe that was entirely mine, down the familiar streets of Oak Park. I slowed down as I passed the luxury condo complex where Serafina lived. A large sign was planted in the lawn. It read, "For sale," in bold red letters. Word on the street was that the investigation into her fraudulent appraisals had bankrupted her, forcing her to liquidate her assets and leave the city. She was gone, just another variable removed from the equation. I eventually found myself parking in front of the coffee shop where this entire plan had been hatched. I walked in and ordered a double shot of espresso, black. I took a seat by the window, watching the pedestrians hurry by on the sidewalk. The coffee was hot and strong, but as I took the first sip, I was surprised. It no longer tasted bitter. It tasted rich, bold, and incredibly sweet. It was the taste of independence. I looked out the window at the clear blue sky. I thought back to that torrential downpour, the way the rain had hammered against the roof of my car while I sat there, shattered and shivering. I smiled, a genuine curve of my lips that reached my eyes. I realized now that the storm had not been a disaster. The rain had not come to drown me. It had come to wash away the filth, the lies, and the dead weight of a life that was never truly mine, leaving me scrubbed clean and standing tall, ready to write the next chapter on my own terms. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Alara's revenge. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.